did cash for clunkers totally destroy the used car market in America, having a ripple effect through more than a decade of keeping our used car prices artificially high? This is an allegation that I've seen leveled against the program for 15 years now, and it keeps coming up, but it doesn't pass the sniff test for me. Welcome back to All Cars Y'all. I am John, and this has been on my mind because every once in a while, cash for clunkers gets brought back up. In fact, there's still videos being produced about it. You see it mentioned in social media posts talking about the price of used cars and how high they are, and it's all based on cash for clunkers. And I just don't completely buy it, with a caveat there at the end. So first off, let's talk about the situation leading up to what this program actually was. It came about in 2009, which of course was after the housing bubble popped and the economy went into a free fall. Big companies were going bankrupt, and the automotive industry was dealing with a nearly 50% reduction in sales. They were really struggling. And so to try to help alleviate this, a bunch of different things were done by the government. And then President Obama, they had a spending package put together to fund two different wars, and they slid into it this program. Its official name is the Car Allowance Rebate System. And the general idea was to do two things. First off, incentivize people to trade in old cars, give them a cash rebate that went to the purchase of a new, more fuel-efficient car, thereby removing less fuel-efficient vehicles from the road, stimulating the auto industry, and getting more fuel-efficient vehicles back on the road. And they had a number of requirements for these vehicles. They had to be less than 25 years old at the date they traded it in. It only worked on a purchase or a 5-year minimum lease new vehicle. And generally speaking, the vehicles had to get an average of 18 miles per gallon, a combined average, 18 miles per gallon or less to be considered. And you had to own it for at least a year continuously and have it insured during that time. Now, this initial appropriation allocated $4 billion to this program, and officially it started on July 1st, 2009, but they began processing claims in July 24th. They allocated $1 billion in the initial tranche to the program, and by July 30th, it was exhausted. So Congress got together, they allocated another $2 billion and ended the program on August 24th. So this program lasted for exactly 1 month. And those requirements that were established on what vehicles could be traded in and used under the program led to some interesting comparisons where a Dodge Grand Caravan with a V6 qualified, but the 4-cylinder did not because it got like 19 miles per gallon. When it finally ended, 677,000 vehicles, just over 677,000, were brought in by the program and scrapped. And that's the other thing that's important to know about this program is these vehicles weren't just traded in and then put back on the used car market. They had requirements to put in a sodium silicate solution into the engine and then run it until it seized. Individual parts could be used off the car, but generally the engine had to be ruined and the car body actually destroyed, crushed, or shredded in the process. These vehicles were literally taken off what would have been the used car market, and that's where a lot of the allegations come against it, is that this took a huge number of vehicles off what would be vehicles on the used car market and instead artificially raised prices because you've reduced the supply. But that doesn't quite ring true for me. It doesn't quite pass the sniff test. And the reason is if you look at the data in 2009, which was a very down year for the auto industry overall, they still sold 35 million light-duty vehicles on the used car market. This 677,000, while sounding like a huge number, is actually less than 2% of the entire supply. Now, I won't disagree that it certainly did hurt a few people, certainly the poorest who needed something that was still reliable and they didn't care if it got 18 or 15 miles per gallon. and the first-time buyer who wants to go to a buy here, pay here kind of place, one payment, and get a cheap car that was still reliable, even if it had a lot of miles on it, and wasn't fuel efficient. It hurt the most vulnerable in the market. And it's interesting to look at what the top vehicles were that were brought in. The top trade-ins were the Ford Explorer four-wheel drive, an F-150, the Grand Cherokee, the Ford Explorer, the Dodge Grand Caravan, and Caravan, Jeep Cherokee, that breaks my heart, the Chevy Blazer, the C-1500 pickup truck, the Ford F-150 four-wheel drive, and a Ford Windstar minivan. Now, I'm not sure that many of the first-time buyers were really dreaming of a Dodge Caravan or a Ford Windstar, but still it took these out of the market. And certainly this program was controversial at the beginning. You have the typical politics playing off of it. Should the government be doing something like this to begin with? But after the fact, when you could look at the data, they actually showed that all they did was move the demand forward 1 month, benefiting the auto industry at least temporarily, but with a corresponding drop the next month. Basically, they took the demand from August, September and shuffled it back 1 month earlier. But when you're talking about only 2% of the overall market at any given time, it was constricted into a much tighter time frame, that 1 month period. But as it ripples out through the economy for the coming months, it becomes a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller portion of impacting used car sales. It just does not pass the sniff test for me that taking these 677,000 vehicles over a month, month and a half off the road dramatically impacted the used car market for months or years to come. Now, it certainly, again, impacted those specific groups, I believe, and overall, it seemed to help the foreign car makers more than anything else, because the top sellers from the program were the Corolla, the Civic, the Camry, the Focus, Elantra, Versa, Prius, Accord, Fit, and Escape. Only 2 of those were American built, so we took in older American vehicles, ruined them, and then sold them imports. That's the great shame. But in terms of the allegations that this ruined the used car market and has led to a persistent high price on used cars, I just don't buy it. The shortage that we had coming out of COVID is a much bigger impact and longer lasting impact than this ever had on the market. Let me know what you think below, guys. I appreciate you being here.